All right, hello class. For today's lesson, we're going to be talking about eights on pylons. For our references, we're going to be using the Airplane Flying Handbook and the CAU Pilot Maneuver Standards. Now, the Airplane Flying Handbook does have some things different from our CAU standards, but generally DPDs will go off our CAU standards or mention, hey, this is how I do things. So personally, I recommend looking at the AFM, reading that through, then looking at our standards to see what's different, and then deciding either with your CFI or as you're learning which is best. So, why do we learn eights on pylons? AFM tells us that they're advanced and difficult, and they develop control. Eights on pylons are a constant maneuver, meaning you're constantly adding, constantly changing as you're going through the maneuver. Winds affect us, we have different altitudes, different speeds, everything affects us as we're doing these maneuvers, so it's really good at developing control and understanding of how is this working, how's that working, what am I doing right, what am I doing wrong. It also shows mastery. Being able to do these, especially with aggressive winds or strong winds, is a really good sign that a pilot understands their aircraft, understands the control, and more importantly, understands visuals, sees their reference point, knows how they're doing with that reference point in mind, and is able to correct if the reference point is too low, too high, to the left, to the right, whatever. Pivotal altitude as well. It also teaches us pivotal altitude, which connects back to our ground speed and how ground speed can affect our rate and radius of turns, but we'll get to that. So, how do we do eights on pylons? Our maneuvers guide states that first, clear the area. All maneuvers, all ground reference maneuvers, we always want to clear the area, make sure that there's no aircraft around us, make sure that there's nothing that's going to mess up our flight generally. Again, picking good maneuver areas as well. You don't want to be at a busy airport or near major cities or buildings while trying to do eights on pylons. So picking a nice flat land, especially out here, there's good roads, trees, even farms or small barns that you're able to use as your two pivotal, or as your two pylons to do those maneuvers. So selecting our pivotal altitude. Pivotal altitude is based on ground speed. The maneuver guide says that we maintain 100 knots in kid airspeed. So obviously ground speed changes with our winds. So maintaining that good, strong speed setting, which the power setting I believe for that is about 2,300 to 2,400. But generally, maneuvering speed is what you want to look for, around 100, 105, and then using our ground speed to adjust for using the ground speed and the winds to adjust for our pivotal altitude. So selecting our pivotal altitude with our speed, that changes as ground speed changes. We'll get to Y in a minute, but let's say we're at 100 knots indicated and our speed is 100 ground speed. Now winds, we're going to be holding at 885 altitude, so 885 feet AGL off the ground from our point. So it's not going to be an MSL, it's going to be AGL. So about here, we're about 500 feet elevation. 885 plus 500 is about 1,385. That's our pivotal altitude for that maneuver. Yep. So now we select the pylons that have a straight boundary between them, perpendicular to the wind. The wind out here is for a different example, but let's say these 2 points are straight on with no wind. We can join in from our 45 entry. Now enter a 45 entry. So as we're coming in, we're going to be entering that and starting our first turn into a pylon, maintaining pivotal altitude with ground speed and correcting with pitch. So as we're going in, we're entering that 45, starting that initial turn, holding our pivotal altitude, and doing that turn in, left turn, maintaining our ground speed that changes. So if winds are changing, that's going to move us around, but maintaining that with our pivotal altitude. If our ground speed changes, our pivotal altitude has to change. So going through, keeping that turn coming, maintaining coordinated flight as well. And now that we're done with that, we start with our next one. Hold straight and level between the points. So now that we finished, going straight and level to our next turn, starting that, repeating 6. So initiate the turn into the pylon, maintain altitude with, or pivotal altitude with ground speed, and correcting for pitch. So we have to pitch down to get our point reference in line with our visual point. For a lot of us students out here, we use our reference point is our wingtips, looking at the wingtips and trying to put the wingtips directly where our point is, so that way we're getting right onto it. Too low with a pivotal altitude, you're going to get the wrong visual and too high, you're going to get past our reference point. So using our wingtips, the AFM does mention how that's different. Now, let's say you're flying aircraft where you're sitting behind someone and the person in front of you is your co-pilot, or vice versa, or it's a larger aircraft with low wings, high wings, swept-back wings. That's going to change everything. So for us, wingtips is good, but that's another consideration to make, is what aircraft you're flying and how that can change your visual as you're doing that turn. So back to us, again, we use our wingtips. Our wingtips are a fairly good reference point to make, so keeping that wingtip on that point, so that way as we're coming through that turn, it's constantly maintaining our visual where we're at. All right, awesome. And then after that, exit and return to cruise. So we finish our turn, we're exiting, and then we just go back to our cruise. The maneuvers guide also mentions that we complete our cruise checklist to leave that maneuver and then go on to the next maneuver or do whatever you have for the rest of that flight. So let's talk about the aerodynamics. Coordination gives us our visual. If we're maintaining coordinated flight, that aircraft is perfectly in line with itself and we're maintaining a good visual. But if we have our tail sticking the wrong direction, now we're changing where our nose is pointed and we're missing that visual point because now we're angled at a different direction than straight on with that point. So maintaining coordination is key. And then let's talk about pivotal altitude. So how does it work exactly? Our last lesson we talked about ground reference maneuvers and how ground speed affects our bank and rate. So as ground speed increases, we get a larger radius, but we slow down on that rate. And again, as we slow down our ground speed, we're getting a faster rate, but a smaller radius. So now connect that with our pivotal altitude. If we're going super fast with our ground speed, we have to maintain a higher point to get a better radius around that point. If we're going 113 on our ground speed, but we're super low, we're going to have a really sharp bank, which for our maneuvers, we can't do that. We aren't really able to do that. Now, at a lower ground speed, let's say we're too high, now we have to, with our lower speed, or our higher speed, you have to lower the bank to be able to get a good visual as you're going through that turn with that large radius. With a slower speed at a higher altitude, you need a sharper bank to maintain that visual as you're going through. So just remembering how ground speed affects our bank and rate will tell us how our pivotal altitude works. So let's talk about some common mistakes. Firstly, you don't clear the area. That happens. It's a common mistake that people make, but always clear the area before your maneuvers. That's what makes sure that there's nothing around you, and again, that you're doing the maneuver in a safe fashion. Incorrect pivotal altitude. So if you make a mistake like I did, you have a really fast speed, but you pick the wrong pivotal altitude, you're going to mess up your reference and mess up your turn. So being able to understand that your ground speed affects your pivotal altitude and being able to fluctuate that as your winds change your ground speed during the maneuver is crucial. The AFM also lists multiple common mistakes and errors. The AFM is a great reference for for all ground maneuvers and all maneuvers in general. So always be looking at the AFM. It's a great resource. Now going back, incorrect entry. So let's say you don't enter from the 45. Let's say you're flying over your reference point and you're just going to hit a beam, both of them, and then start that inward turn. You're going to fail. Your entry point is always going to be that 45-degree entry. Even as winds change, you're always entering that 45. Fails to maintain bank. For us, we have to maintain a bank. I believe it's no greater than 40, as mentioned in the maneuvers guide. So being able to maintain corrective bank as you're doing that turn is important to maintain that reference and to keep the maneuver within standards. Another side note I'd like to mention is incorrect wind. So if the wind's pushing us this direction, we're going to be shifting down. Now our reference point is farther than we'd like. We're coming through. Now we're getting a lower ground speed because we have a headwind. And as we're going, now we're getting pushed into our reference point. So not correcting for wind and not maintaining coordination with that is going to make our maneuver worse and going to keep us out of standards. Now, aggressive or corrective action. So as you're doing these, you're constantly moving around. Okay, let me make it a little sharper. Let me pull up a little bit to maintain that visual. Let me push down a little bit. So being able to do that smoothly and calmly, not yanking on the yoke, not pushing down crazy, not making a super sharp turn in or sharp turn out, is going to help you maintain that reference and keep everything nice and smooth for your maneuver. Again, uncoordinated, we talked about that. Uncoordinated flight is going to mess up your maneuvers, and it's going to put you in stall and spin conditions if you do reach that. So always maintain coordinated flight. And then lack of attention division. Being able to look at your instruments at your point, back, forth, as you're doing them is going to keep your 8s-on pylons good. Because if you're staring at your PFD or you're staring at your instruments, you're going to be chasing your altitude, chasing your airspeed, and you could even be holding the correct bank, but if you're not looking at your visual point, you're not in tune with that point, and you're missing your reference, you're missing the whole 8s-on pylon, and you'll look up and realize, oh, I was way off because the wind drifted me and I didn't pay attention to that. I was just maintaining everything in my PFD. So always looking back, forth, look at your reference, look at your airspeed, cross-reference both, saying, okay, my altitude's good, my point's good, my airspeed's good, my point's good, going back, forth. That's with all ground reference maneuvers, 8s-on pylons especially.